Hello and welcome to Start the Beat. My name is Sykes and this is my podcast. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank everyone who checked out the last episode. If you're one of those people, I hope you enjoyed it and thanks so much for coming back. But for those of you out there who are new to the show, welcome. Please feel free to make yourselves at home. And as always, there's beer and soda and water in the fridge. Cheers. Yeah. Water, good stuff. Tell you this, I mentioned before we started recording, I played a show last night. Last night was a Wednesday, and I think I drank maybe one too many beers for a Wednesday, and I just woke up not feeling great.
Yeah.
But I'm feeling a little bit better now.
That's good.
It's the evening. I've had some good food. I'm drinking water. I'm taking care of myself. And for anyone out there that's like, stop talking about yourself, who's this nice looking guy in the fancy jacket sitting to my left, please make some noise for my friend, Jon Tai. What up? So, Jon.
Yes.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Yeah. Very happy and excited to be recording my very first podcast ever.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is your first podcast.
Uh-huh.
I'm very excited to be sharing this experience with you, and I hope that the rest are all downhill from here. I hope
I'm
just
sure.
sets the bar
Pretty much.
as high as literally possible, but we'll see how it goes. So for everyone out there that is not familiar with my friend Jon, Jon is a magician. That's
Indeed.
in one way, but there's a lot more to what you do. You're almost like a performing artist to some degree. How would you describe what it is that you do?
Oh, man. Starting off with the big questions.
Yeah.
So magician is the easiest one word kind of short answer, right? If anyone asks what I do. And I think it's accurate in a lot of ways in that it encapsulates a lot of what I do. But I think it's inaccurate, not so much because of the word itself, but because most people don't necessarily know what being a magician is all about, right? And I don't necessarily know what being a magician is all about. I think it's something that is very different for many, many different people who call themselves magicians as well, right? And so I guess for me, easiest way I can do is I am primarily a performer. That is my main interest in magic. I mean, I love all aspects of it and many aspects, but with the primary goal of creating experiences and sharing them with people. Yeah.
The thing that I've really picked up on you from talking to you over the past however many months that we've been friends at this point now. Shout outs to the Pear and the Pickle.
Bobby.
Previous guest of the show. I don't remember what number it was, but you can go back and listen to that. But in our conversations, one of the things that I've noticed is there's so many parallels between what you do as a musician or a magician and what
Happens
I do
all the time.
as
Yes.
a musician. They're very similar words. And in terms of, sure, I can write a song or you can come up with a trick, but there's so much more that goes into the actual execution and delivering that to a room full of people versus just learning the trick itself, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
There's more that goes into it that isn't necessarily part of the quote magic itself, but more about like how do you like public speaking and performing and laying something out and getting a crowd engaged that is in one way or another kind of a magical thing, but it's not part of the trick.
Yeah.
And that's something that seems to go into a lot of what you do because of how all of your work usually involves a stranger to some degree. Like you're always working with other people and getting them involved. It's not like I have this set thing that I'm doing. Here it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it seems to be that you're always working with other people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there are a lot of different places on the spectrum around this. And so to go with the musician-magician analogy, right? It's like, I mentioned oftentimes writing the song is the base level, right? It's like if you're a musician, you have to have music, right? But that's just the beginning, right? And then when you, from what I understand of your own performance, when you think about performing, you think about how you want to stage it, how you want to light it, how even things as basic as, right, what your set list is in the order. You probably think about those things, right? And those all factor into the overall experience that you're giving your audience, right?
Yes.
And I'm sure there are certainly musicians who don't really think about those things, right? They create a song and then they think, okay, I'm going to go out and do a show and have a set list. And then they play the song, right? But maybe that's where it stops, right? And I think with magic, it's often a lot of the same parallels, right? Where oftentimes it's like you get into magic often because you are fascinated by the tricks themselves. And so you learn a bunch of tricks and then you go do them and then you stop there, right? And it can work to a certain extent. But I think just like in music, I'm sure you've gone to see a show where maybe the music is wonderful, but the show as a whole isn't as engaging as it could be, right? Because there's always the fascination, not just with the music, but with the person too, right? And I think it's in music and in magic, I think it's important to communicate that, right? And there are a lot of ways and things that add up to communicating that beyond just playing a song or doing a magic trick, right?
Absolutely. And I think that you had mentioned there's, different levels and different types of people that do magic. Same thing with music, where there are some people that maybe just want to play a couple songs. Maybe some people will just want to do a couple tricks, but then there are people that want to craft a whole set and be able to do like an hour of original material in front of a room, which seems like a direction that you've been working towards for some time now. Like you want to be like this. I want to give you a show with some sort of a narrative that goes from start to finish and tells a story about the wonders of life.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Right. And
through like a variety of different tricks.
Yeah. And it's like oftentimes in magic, there's the typical magic show oftentimes, which is like, here's a trick, then here's another trick, then here's another trick, then here's another trick. And maybe they build in some way, but then that's a show. Right. And right now, what I'm working on, the big project and what I'm trying to explore is putting together a show that's maybe anywhere from 75 to 90 minutes long, which
so long.
Can be very long. Yes.
Wow,
Exactly. And then, finding a way to have it be more than just trick, right? Where there is texture to it beyond that, and also something communicated beyond that. And I'm talking in very vague terms because I'm very much in the throes of kind of figuring out what that is for me right now. I
absolutely understand.
Yeah.
It's something that I've gone through with my performance. The last album that I released, I was really hell-bent on putting together a performance that showcased the album from start to finish, but with things woven in between the songs that would tell a full narrative. And in retrospect, I did not do as good of a job as I wish I would have, but I tried my damnedest and I learned a lot about how various things work. So, moving forward now with this new thing that I'm working on, my next hour, if you will, I've learned a lot from the previous experiences, and I'm really stoked with like what I'm building now. And I think that's just, it takes time. You kind of have to have those little hiccups and things like that.
Yeah. You just keep doing the work, right? And I mean, I think we talked about this earlier on about that segment of Ira Glass talking about the gap, right?
Yeah.
Between your taste and your vision and what could be good, and then what you actually create, and there's that gap, right? And then the only way to close it is just by thinking about it, sure, but just doing more and more work, and gradually over time, you close that gap. Yeah.
So with you as a magician, oh my. How many? I need to put a counter on the screen of how many times I do that.
That would be great.
It's gonna happen at least 6 more times, I imagine. So as a magician, a magician. That's the word now.
Word, yes.
That's the word. Holy smokes. As Jon Tai.
Indeed, as Jon Tai.
2020. You've been doing the magic stuff for a long time, a nice chunk of your life, maybe not to the extent that you are now, but you've had an interest in it for a long time. But you weren't always doing magic. There was a life prior to the magic. Let's get a little bit into your background and where you came from, and just like the story that led to where we are today.
Yeah, so I got into magic when I was around the 8th grade. So it was about 17 years ago. Prior to that, I was a kid in a nice upper middle class neighborhood and didn't have many worries in the world, and so I was also, not a shocker and not a strange story when it comes to magic, but I was a very shy and awkward kid. And so, the question of how you got into magic is more, I think, a question of how did you stay in magic, right? Because a lot of people had magic phases. I don't know if you ever had a magic kit or anything when you were a kid.
The closest thing I probably had was a yo-yo.
Okay.
And learning how to do the different yo-yo tricks.
Yeah,
which is
short
not
yo-yo
quite
phase too.
it, but
No, ancillary things. Yeah. And so I got into magic, and I just was obsessed with it. And I can't necessarily articulate exactly what it was. It was just I saw a guy doing some card tricks, and he basically did something that was so impossible, so kind of reality breaking to me at the time that it just struck something in me. And then I had to find out more about whatever all this was,
What's funny is you mentioned that something just happened and you couldn't explain it. And I find that usually those reactions, when people are explaining something from their past and they can't quite describe it, it makes it that much more real. Usually if somebody has this in-depth explanation as to why they got into something very specifically, it's like, are you sure? This is a little bit too specific. Usually it's just like, I just came across this thing and I loved it. I just had to do it. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, it's usually emotion driven, right? It strikes something. And
it's like there was a missing puzzle piece in your spirit of some sort, and you found it with the magic. It's kind of plopped it in and like, okay, let's keep going.
Or I didn't even know it was missing, and then that moment showed me this gap, and this gap turned out to be a never-ending rabbit hole, pardon the pun. And,
Sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I just spend hours upon hours doing that, and kind of getting deeper and deeper into it. And then there were now that I've been doing it for a while, and also just to give a little context on the timeline, from the beginning of last year, 2019 is when I started working on magic full time. And so, the last year and change of working on magic is a very different period from the last 16 years, just because it's approaching it in a much fuller. I'm literally spending my full time doing it now. And that is just a very different thing than spending some time on it here and there, or even when I was younger, spending many hours, but still having schoolwork and all that jazz.
Well, sure. Because you eventually went to college.
Yeah, exactly.
You went to a nice school.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
You went to Cornell.
Indeed. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Where's that at?
It's in Ithaca.
Okay.
Yeah, Ithaca, New York, upstate New York. Great town. Great town.
So did you grow up in Pittsburgh, or did you wind up in Pittsburgh?
I wound up in Pittsburgh. So I grew up in New Jersey.
Okay.
And then I wound up in Pittsburgh about 7 years ago.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that was work related, I imagine?
Ish, in the sense that the work I was doing at the time was a medical software company. And the nature of the job was it was completely remote, right? And so I spent a lot of time traveling and working, which was wonderful, and it kind of afforded me those kinds of opportunities. And then I passed through Pittsburgh, kind of just random happenstance, and it was at that point in my life where I wanted to, spread my wings and live elsewhere and strike out on my own. And so I just got a good feeling from this place. So I was like, what the hell? It's close enough and easy enough to hop over here that if it doesn't work out, I'll just hop somewhere else. And then it's worked out pretty fine, I think.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
So going back to your youth and talking about being, a shyer kid but just getting into magic and things like that, I'm curious about what it was like for you breaking out of that shyness in terms of, did that happen through school, or did it happen more through magic and doing that?
Yeah,
stuff.
It
seems like even your work, school can be very isolating.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, you can have a social life outside of it, but it can also be super isolating. And it seemed like your job, working remotely, traveling, could also be isolating in its own way. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about what led you to this breaking out of your shell thing, where now you're up at the Pear and the Pickle with a magic mind reading a mystery sign and doing tricks for strangers on weekdays,
yeah,
because that's so outside, it's so not, it's very extroverted in a way.
Yeah, I totally get that. And it's funny.
Even when I sit down and talk with you now, it's always just hey, can I show you a trick? You're just very but it almost seems like more just this compulsion to need to test and experiment the trick maybe overrides the any of the shyness that you had, but I'm sure that you've shaken a lot of that off.
Yeah.
Up till now. But I'm curious about that, what that process was like for you.
Yeah, many things there. I mean, now it's not so much about shyness versus, I don't know, audacity or extroversion. Now it is more like what you hit on there, compulsion to test a thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so then
Gotcha.
when I'm at the Pear and Pickle and I'm working on something, then I might push sharing magic with people or like you because, with regulars just to try things out. But, it's funny because, every once in a while, my mom will just make that comment where it's like, I can't. Who would have thought that you would be doing this thing now? Looking at you as a kid who like had trouble, talking to the cashier at the grocery store and would not be comfortable doing that. And I think part of magic that draws, that is a draw at first, is it gives this avenue to step outside of your shell and. A less euphemistic way of putting it is it was very much a social crutch, I mean, that wasn't the only reason I was interested in it. There was also a variety of different things like that emotion and that interest and that intrigue, but also certainly there was this feeling of like, oh, if I can do these wonderful things and do them for people in a very direct way, then I'll be more social and people will like me and that kind of thing,
Sure.
And
I think I found I had a very similar upbringing, only child, just kind of, video games, music. I was just into all that stuff. Didn't really have a whole lot of friends. And over time, I ended up I didn't even realize it, but once I started getting into music and playing shows, I was like making friends. And I was like, oh, now I have friends. Like I wasn't even thinking about it. Or like now I'm interacting with people. Talking to strangers after performances. I'm selling people CDs. And it was like a weird skill set that I wasn't used to having, and I didn't even think about it until I was in the middle of it.
Yeah. Was it kind of like a byproduct of what you were interested in? Or did you ever like have a consciousness? Like, did you ever feel uncomfortable socially or like that kind of thing? Or was it just kind of a natural transition?
I didn't feel uncomfortable. I just think I almost kind of preferred being alone.
Yeah.
Which was, and I'm still kind of like that. I guess you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I'm a very, very lone wolf type of person.
Yeah.
I mean, I enjoy company, but also I have no problem if I get left alone for a couple of days, like I can keep myself busy because much like you, I'm always trying to learn and grow and expand my work. And I remember like getting to know you, seeing you at the Pear and Pickle, and like you'll just be sitting there like reading with like a stack of books about magic or like practicing tricks by yourself. And I love it because I'm just like, this guy is really serious about this. Like you're really going for it.
It was funny too, because it was a long time before we actually like even interacted with each other.
Yeah.
We saw each other there for probably months before we actually had a conversation.
Yeah. Oh, again, that's like one of those things where it's like, I'm in there every day. And I feel like we usually see each other there. I feel like we're both there probably every day.
Almost.
Close.
Yeah.
Very, very close. And it's one of those things where it's like, even though you have a sign up about like doing the tricks, it was like, I'm not going to bug that guy.
Right.
Like why? Like,
yeah, because you're there.
Why should I think that? Like you want to be bugged. That's why you
it literally
made the sign.
says on demand.
Yes, please bug me. But then, I remember. I think one day I sat down. And we ended up, or maybe Kat maybe introduced us. Something happened. But anyways, here we are now. Look at us go.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's always cool though, as I was saying, to see you just working, because I just from my outside perspective, it seems like you're really giving this your all. And like you'll see some people, they're like, oh, I'm doing this thing, I'm working on this thing, but you never really see them working on it, and you don't see the byproduct of it. But with you, in a short amount of time that I've known you, it's like, I see you're doing events and you're always working on stuff at the cafe, and I'm sure you're working on stuff at home too, and it seems like it's building. And you've had recently you did some shows at Liberty Magic, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like things are going good.
It's in a good direction, and I appreciate that it comes off as I'm working hard.
Yeah.
Because man, life is so much easier in a lot of ways than before when I was working at the medical software company, But,
well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's not hard in terms of, it's really laborious to
No,
do these
no.
things. But I mean, again,
yeah.
you went to school for so many years, and you probably just have a background in studying and absorbing knowledge, and
Yeah.
you just have the discipline for it now. So,
And always working on building it, and honestly, the discipline part came much more after school, much more through working for that medical software company, which was, it was a very difficult experience, but in mostly a good way. I think there are a few worse hells.
Like a problem solving sort of difficult.
Yeah, in that it was am I allowed to swear on this? Or, yeah, great. It was kind of a shit show, It was like a small company. It was maybe 20-ish people when I joined. And when I joined up, it was one of my best friends now in school. He worked in the support department. And so it was him, me, and then one of his best friends growing up, Freddie. And the three of us were the entire support department for this medical software company. It was like the Three Musketeers / Stooges, and so while I was in school, I was like, okay, I'll make some money on the side while I'm studying. School still takes priority, and then after I graduate, I'll figure out what I really want to do. And then 8.5 years later at the job, but what it kind of transformed into was, at a certain point. This is my second foray into working on magic as a profession. And so my first foray was right after I graduated from college. I kind of told myself and I told everyone that I knew that I was going to, keep working at this job to make an income, but then work on with the eventual goal of working on magic professionally, right? But
now, were you in Pittsburgh at this time, or you were elsewhere?
I was elsewhere, yeah. So I'd graduated. My home base was still my parents' house in New Jersey, but then I was traveling around as well. And so the big kind of soul-searching thing I did was I went on one of those quintessential American road trips, right?
Okay.
And because I could work while I traveled, I literally took 8 months and I drove around the country, and it was a fantastic experience. And on paper, what I said was, okay, I know I want to move away from home and strike out on my own so I can see the country and figure out where I want to go. Secondly, I'm working on this magic thing so I can perform as I travel and maybe work on busking, which is terrifying, and ramp up my skills in that regard. And yeah, so those are kind of like my outward reasons, right? But I think what it really came down to was there was a part of me that I think wanted to put myself in situations that were new and that were alien, and where I was a complete stranger where the world around me was a stranger to me, and where I was a stranger to the world around me. And in a sense, I think I was just, if I have to put it into words now, right, I think I was looking to be comfortable, to figure out how to be comfortable in my own skin by putting myself in situations where I knew I would ramp up the discomfort and to learn how to just be in those situations. And it kind of comes back to being shy as a kid and magic being this kind of social crush, because, a few years into magic, very quickly, I read a book called Absolute Magic by a very prominent magician now named Darren Brown. And it was basically at the time that he wrote it, his philosophy on magic performance and what he wanted it to be for himself. And hopefully that it would, maybe other people could glean something from that. And it completely changed the way I thought about magic. And it raised the bar several standard deviations above where my head was at the time, which was wonderful. And it was one of those few life-changing books and moments for me, specifically in the world of magic. The part that was difficult for a period was it raised the bar so high that everything I did was crap, and I kind of stopped wanting to perform that much, right? And then also I kind of, there was a point where I quickly became aware of magic being this social crutch for me, and not wanting to be, the guy who's the magician first and then Jon Tai second, right? And part of me wanting to be me, Jon Tai, who does magic, right? And not the other way around. And so that was also part of the reason why I kind of had this push and pull with magic too, where I loved it and I wanted to share it, but I also didn't want it to define me, right? And so, that road trip kind of, I realized, became that in hindsight after I'm kind of self-analyzing. But, partway through that trip, I basically had like a little quarter life crisis where I was in Portland with a friend and we were driving, and then I I basically had this moment where I consciously and verbally with my friend faced this question of like, is this what I really want to do? Because I wasn't having fun performing magic. It felt like an obligation, and it was giving me a ton of anxiety trying to busk because it did not come naturally to me for a host of reasons. And so and then the follow-up question to that, which was even more terrifying, was like, if not magic, then what? Right? Then
Sure.
what am I doing? I'm just wasting my time at this medical software company. I don't know. Right? And so having kind of consciously faced that question, I stopped doing magic altogether for the next few months, and I was immediately so much happier. And
Wow.
yeah, it was like just a weight was lifted. And then I just started just being on this trip and just being more present in it, I guess, and just enjoying myself with these new experiences. And then the logical conclusion about the job was like, I'm a privileged dude. Like my parents worked their asses off so that I could have all these opportunities. They came from Taiwan. They came over here, didn't speak the language, new culture, all that jazz, that. And so I was privileged enough to think to myself, if I'm going to spend 8 hours plus a day, 5 days a week, also sometimes plus doing this thing, then why would I just waste my time doing it? Why not find something valuable in it? And if I can't find something valuable in it, then I should just go do something else because I can and I have the means to do that, right? And so that was kind of when I drank the fruit punch of that job, and then ended up growing and learning a lot from it just through the challenges of that. I learned a much greater discipline, a much greater work ethic. I learned how to roll with many, many things outside of my control, and all of that feeds into everything I do every day now. Just trying to do my own thing now, which I would not do anywhere near as effectively if I hadn't, gone through all that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm curious now how coming back into magic, how that discipline and the time off, how it maybe affected your approach to magic when you decided to get back into it, if at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things is working on the job taught me to have a much more grounded view and approach to things. It's just, all of life is kind of like, one way to view much of life is like problem solving, right? Like you have certain goals or things you want to do, you hit, and there's something about the word problem too. It's like it has these negative connotations, but no, they're just things, right?
Oh, yeah,
that you have to work through and stuff. And so magic is the same way, right? And it's it's not just any performative or artistic endeavor. It's not just the art, because you have to make a living, right? You have to make money, and so there are those practical sides of it, of the business side of it. And so it's just like, okay, approach the whole thing as a whole, and okay, if I want to do this and I want to do this full time, then I have to address all the things. I have to enjoy and grow the magic itself, but I also have to find ways to get booked and get paid for it. Right?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Eventually, I had a pretty good runway after saving up from working the old job. But yeah. And so I think it just kind of gave me a much, I think in the past, when I thought of the first time I did it, when I thought of doing magic as a profession, it was more like this idea of it. I was enamored with this idea, and more so, less for myself, more so I could be like, oh yeah, I'm a magician. So how cool is that, right?
I'm really curious about if your like character changed, because now when I see you do magic, you're very calm, grounded, and really focused on, getting the attention of the person that you're working with in a very calm way. It's not real like showy or gimmicky, like, put on a voice and you're like, here's a trick, and there's no like fireworks and like none of that shit, right? It's very like, this is me, and it's more of like a conversation about life, or a mysterious part of life, something like the way that you weave your narrations into the tricks that I've seen you do. But that's what you do now. I'm curious if you were doing something similar to that in the past, or if you were trying to be more of like a character, like, I do magic.
Yeah. I was never like a big character, one, because when I first started, I was still shy and awkward, so it would feel very uncomfortable to like do something crazy like that.
Yeah.
It's funny though. I kind of remember there's this one memory that sticks out with me. It was in like the early on when I got into Magic. I learned this convoluted card trick that involved a lot of counting and dealing and stuff. Like just at a baseline level, not a very good trick. But I did it for this creative arts class that I had, right? And so I'm standing in front of the group of my classmates, and it's something I would have just been terrified to do, but through the channel of Magic, it was terrifying, but still something I was willing and wanted to do, And I remember going through this trick, and the words I was saying was very like blah 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 blah, just like talking at the class.
Sure.
There was no like connection. And I remember, the class was great, and the instructor was very warm, supportive. And I remember his comment where he was like, I kind of like that Barker style speech he had. And at the time I just took it as a compliment.
Yeah, sure.
But I think it comes back to this process of figuring out how to be comfortable in my own skin has also been, I think, a process for me of not to get too floofy, but just connecting with people as human beings.
Yeah,
right.
No.
And and so I think the style that you see now is just a honing is just a honing of that over time. Yeah, I mean, I think from the time that I don't know exactly if there's a turning point. Certainly, reading that book, Absolute Magic, started me thinking down this path, but about the experience we're having together when we're sharing magic and the way that it's affecting you, right? And the way that it's always a you or us, right? Rather than just a look at what I can do, right? And that's kind of been instilled in me for a long time early on in Magic, and so. And it all ties into not wanting to be the magic man, right? Where it's me and we're connecting and having this conversation, and then we're sharing this piece of magic as well.
It's like, it's almost as if instead of being like, I'm manipulating the universe around me, it's like the universe is already manipulated, and I'm like opening up a door to show you.
Yeah,
how it's manipulated.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And it's funny, I recently was playing around with kind of analogy like that for the way of kind of framing an effect, where it was like, a lot of the magic I've been doing lately, because what's been on my mind is like magic itself and thinking about the different aspects of magic and how people who aren't magicians think about it. And then also oftentimes I feel like a large focus in the past year has been performing magic in a way that educates about magic as well, that reveals a little about magic.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like, oh, it's magnets and stuff, but about what goes into it, And I think the more, when you understand or kind of get a peek behind the curtain of any craft, you appreciate it a bit more in a different way. And so, one of the analogies I was thinking of was that like, magic isn't just the thing that happens out here, right? It's the whole experience. The most important parts of the experience are what happens in your own mind, right? Before the thing out here happens, and then after the thing out here. And then I was thinking of the thing out here kind of as more like just a gust of wind that blows open this door to a place that we don't normally let ourselves go to as adults. But then maybe we get to kind of peek through or dip a toe in.
You almost there's sort of like the Twilight Zone, how like Rod Sterling would introduce and talk about all the beginning of the episodes. Like that's kind of you, like, let me show you a world of tricks, but not so gimmicky. But you know what I mean? Like you're kind of like opening up that door to some sort of a metaphorical Twilight Zone.
Yeah, and I think it's fun. That's part of why we like the Twilight Zone, right? It's fun to kind of let ourselves live in a strange world for a little bit.
Yeah,
even knowing it's not real. Like I don't want anyone to walk away being like, oh, that guy can actually read my mind, or oh, he can actually wave his hands and turn the back of a playing card from red to blue. No,
sure,
yeah. I mean, we're all intelligent human beings, rational human beings, and I never want anyone to walk away less intelligent than they met me, right?
I think it's just fun to see, people that can, because the way that, musicians manipulate air to create sound and, in pitches and notes and create compositions. Magicians find a way to, manipulate things visually and just kind of trick your mind and your brain in a way. I don't know if trick is the right word. Is there like a preferred vocabulary when talking about these things? Manipulate. But I feel as though you understand what I'm trying to say, because again, you're not really reading somebody's mind. You're not really changing the color of something. You're not really doing these things. You're just able to give. I don't know. How would you word it? Like, help me out here.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. So what I've been thinking lately, especially these last couple of days, is just in terms of the experience, right? Like, what is the experience that I want to create for someone, right? And I think, I don't know if it's the same for musicians. I mean, you maybe often it's not explicitly thought about, right? But maybe it's an emotion or something, right? But then you're trying to convey this idea or emotion through either music or a piece of magic. And so, I don't know. I guess it's just there are the specific things to magic is specifically at a base level, it's the experience of something that contradicts our concept of reality.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's what makes, in some ways, that's what makes magic, right? If you want to look at it from one lens. All of these points are infinitely debatable, right, and discussable. But then taking that baseline, then what is with each piece? What is the experience I'm trying to create for you? What do I want you to go through? And then it's just using whatever tools that I have in the realm of magic to do that, I guess. Yeah. Clearly something I'm still very much figuring out.
Yeah, I have a feeling that you'll...
Yeah.
I hope you never do figure it out.
Oh, I'm sure I won't.
Because there's... It's funny as though, the mystery that is going to intrigue people to watch you, I find that same mystery is going to drive you in a way to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you're always going to be pushing yourself to figure out what you can do next, and people are going to be curious to see what you can do the next time they come and see you, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
just keeps going.
It just keeps going. There's a constant evolution of thought, and
as you said earlier, you are about a year ago was when you started doing this full time.
Mm-hmm.
So a good question that I have that I feel can transcend any sort of entertainment endeavor. You made this decision now to make this your full-time thing, but I imagine that you took some time to prepare for this. You didn't just wake up one day like, well, I'm not working anymore. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
There was some steps that went in place to working up to being able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So what were some of those steps that you took, and what would be some advice that you would give to other creatives out there who are maybe looking to pursue their dreams, goals, passions on a more full-time basis?
Yeah. For me, many of the steps were not super deliberate, but it's a question of how much my conscious / subconscious intentions kind of directed gradually towards this. But one of the big things I will say is that, and this is something I've thought, but also have read in this book by Jamie D. Grant, who is a magician who basically wrote this kind of his approach and handbook. He literally called it The Approach to performing close-up magic as a living. And he lays out all these, basically it's a really easily readable format of these things he's learned. And each chapter is like a singular concept that he drives home. And it's not like paragraphs. It's like short blocks of text. And one of the chapters he had was, there's nothing wrong with a day job. And he's so right, because it gives you this safety net to feel things out as you go along, right? And it also gives you this safety net to work on things even after you don't have the day job, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no way. I find it incredibly difficult to imagine doing what I'm doing right now if I didn't have a runway. Like if I was in a position where it's like looking at my books and being like, okay, if I don't book a gig next month, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
You know, I can't imagine being in that kind of position.
So the position that you were in was you were just able to set aside enough money for you to sit on while you figure out how to make money off of the next thing.
Exactly. Right. And so that has been a huge thing for me. Right. And so, so if I had to boil it down to one thing, I would say that would be the biggest thing, having something to give you that leeway and that runway. And then also, and this is a difficult thing because I know there are things that I would want to tell myself and impart to myself like years ago, but I don't know if I'd have been able to hear it or internalize it, because I think there's only so much you can do to really change someone's course or where they're at. In the end, it comes down to them experiencing things and learning in their own time and then being open to shifting, Yeah.
What I've found is normally most people that do stuff, you had mentioned that it was more of a subconscious thing. Maybe you weren't necessarily planning to do it. The stars just aligned and you made the call and it was able to happen. It was just like you wanted to do it. You found a way to make it happen and you did it. It wasn't like you planned crazy for it.
Exactly. It wasn't like a year ago I had this idea, okay, these are the steps I'm going to take to transition, right?
And I find that most people that are in a position to do something, and if they really want to do it, they just find a way to make it happen. And there usually isn't much planning really involved in it. I find that if you need to get to a point where you're really breaking down these spreadsheets and these graphs of how you're gonna, if like you're going insane and like really planning it too much, I find like too many plans is usually a good way to make nothing happen.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, and I also hesitate because I'm sure that approach maybe has worked amazingly for people out there.
I'm not saying that it hasn't. I just, from my experience, my personal experience, it's my story. That's how things worked for me. I want to do this. So I just started doing it. And
same. Yeah.
It's not really thinking too much about like, how am I going to do something?
And I think that was the problem with me when I first wanted to do magic full time, because I had this image and then I was stuck in that and I was paralyzed by that kind of static image. But, the world's a friggin' fluid place, right? And so I think what has helped me the most is almost like is a short-term and fluid mindset, right? That doesn't mean ignoring the long-term future. I still think about the longer-term future and think, okay, maybe it'd be I want to reach these certain goals or that kind of thing, right? But day to day, I'm almost thinking ahead, like maybe a couple weeks, a month, and that's a very different approach than I've had in the past, and just trusting that if things change, then I'll just shift myself, right? But keep working. It's almost like it just reminded me of this climate change analogy that Neil deGrasse Tyson did on Cosmos, where he's walking on the beach with a dog, right? And the dog's like walking all zigzag, and then he's like comparing that's like weather patterns, and that's weather changing day to day, right? But the overall path of both him and the dog is in one linear direction, and that's climate change, right? And that's, I guess, how I feel right now, where I have this long approach, which right now is just, can I do this? And two things happen. One is it be financially feasible and sustainable over a longer period of time. And then two is it something that I want to do? And that I think is really important in this endeavor, right? Because if I'm not still loving what I'm doing and enjoying it and fulfilled by it, then there are a million other things I could do that would be easier to make a living at.
Sure.
Right. And so that is integral, right? And so I don't want to be in a position like I was the first time around, where I was just not enjoying it and not wanting to do it, right? So am I still loving it? Is it a financially sustainable, right? And so those are the things the financially sustainable part is the thing that I'm working towards as the next long-term goal.
And that's the thing that can really cripple your love, is like when something that you love, you start depending on it financially.
Yes, it's very different.
That's a tightrope.
Yes.
It's so, that's something that I've dealt with a lot in music, in art, freelance work, and the stuff that I do. And I know a lot of people that also struggle with it, but it's like, well, if you really love it, then you love it. And it's really hard to monetize that sort of thing. But like you said, if your concern is more to make money over doing something that you love, there's much easier ways to make money than trying to be a freelance artist or trying to be a magician or a musician or a musician
or either. All of the above, right?
Yeah, all of those things. But so I find that you really need to have that passion. And I find that the people that have that real passion for their craft are typically the ones that can find a way to actually monetize it, because they have something a little bit more special about what they're doing.
Maybe they just wanted enough to actually put in the work on the other sides of things, right? I'm also curious,
how much environment has to do with, success. 'Cause I think it does play a huge part for I'm trying so hard
for magicians this time,
for musicians in Pittsburgh for sure, because we don't really have a music industry here. There's a lot of talent. It's insane, but it's just there's no easy platform. But that's okay. Most good things don't come easy.
Sure.
So for the magician side of things, I know that there is some sort of a community here. We had mentioned briefly Liberty Magic earlier, and I'm wondering now too if just having that community in Pittsburgh has helped you with trying to pursue this a little bit more versus when you were doing it busking and being on the road and maybe not having an environment to exist within.
Immensely. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy that Liberty Magic exists, right? And so they opened up. So just for anyone who doesn't know, it's a small theater dedicated to magic shows. Full disclosure, I work there now. So, just a quick plug. But they opened up in February of last year. And I got a notice in my email, because I get the emails from the Cultural Trust in October of 2018 saying that they were opening up this venue dedicated to magic shows. Just as I was like, I think I might leave my job and do magic full time,
Shit.
Yeah. I'm pretty skeptical and rational. I don't generally believe in signs, but if one punches me in the face, I'm not gonna, ignore the punch. And
that's pretty nuts.
Yeah. And so I, basically looked into it, researched who was involved, and through a longer story that we can get into if you want to later. Basically, I badgered people and took the steps to say hi and luckily they said hi back, and eventually I got hired to work there. And then through working there and being involved with the theater, there's been a lot of opportunities that have come up. I've gotten to do the shows that we mentioned earlier at the theater and to meet other magicians who have been making a living doing magic. And it's really been a lot of the backbone of what I've been working on. And so, it's an interesting thought experiment to think, okay, what if, because Pittsburgh's not a large town, though it has an incredible art scene for the size of the city. But what if a magic theater never opened up, and it would be super interesting to see what things would look like. I think I would have had to have put a lot more active and proactive effort into the business side of things and building like bookings and that kind of thing. And so, I don't know. It's just one of those unknowable paths, but I would hazard a guess that the path would have been more difficult if Liberty Magic didn't exist. Yeah. And so, I think, environment can play a huge part. I still, even now, I don't feel like I have a very good understanding of the market in Pittsburgh and like the market of certainly maybe a better understanding of supply, because I've met other magicians and I've seen other magicians around town. But I certainly have no sense really still of the market of demand. Right. And so I don't, that's something I'm still kind of feeling out, of the feasibility of getting consistent bookings year after year, over time. But, I guess one of the nice things is there are, like where you are, your environment can have a huge impact on your ability to be successful at a thing, right? But especially in this day and age, it's like it's not just out of your hands, right? You can choose your environment, right? And you can choose to, and that was I can't remember when that popped in my head, like years ago. It was like, oh, right, you can just choose to live somewhere else oftentimes. And that's a crazy ability that we have, that many of us have now, that, was not an option that, a generation ago or 2 generations ago that people had. And that's kind of bananas,
Yeah.
So,
with booking in Pittsburgh, outside of anything that's attached to Liberty Magic, that's something that you're saying that you're still experimenting with and figuring out.
Yeah.
Because I imagine what would the demand be? Because for a band, it's like, okay, well, we know these other places have bands, so maybe they'll want my band sometime. But for magicians, I imagine it's such a smaller market where it's like, oh, if one place had a magician one time and then you reach out, all of a sudden it's like maybe you're stepping on somebody else's gig or something.
Yeah.
I don't know how the community works, but I imagine there's probably a lot of unique opportunity, but like selling people on it's probably the hardest thing. I imagine there are a lot of places like any one of the 2 million breweries that are within 5 minutes of where we're sitting right now, right? I'm sure if you were like, hey, I do magic, I would like to come down to your brewery on a weekend and do some tricks for the patrons, like they'd be like, oh, that sounds neat. And then you're like, and I need pay
and I need money.
and it's like, oh, how does that, so
Yeah.
that's how do you I don't know, how do you do that?
It just, it depends on what direction you want to go in, right? And so another thing I think a lot of people don't realize is that, okay, you've got magic as a business, a big umbrella, right? But just like as with any other industry, like music or anything, there are a ton of different like mini umbrellas that you could go to make your living, right? So in magic, oftentimes there's focus on corporate events. There's the college circuit. Some performers, make a living doing just college shows and that kind of thing. There's also obviously children's magicians, right? Magicians who specialize in performing for kids. And then there's trade shows, that kind of thing. And then like you mentioned, restaurant magicians, that kind of thing. And so for me, I've kind of been going down the private party corporate route, and then also weddings. Weddings are kind of an interesting venue.
That makes sense.
Yeah. What's funny is that in the UK, weddings are the number one source of business for close-up magicians. Like it's a very common thing to hire a magician for your wedding in the UK. And then in the States, no one ever really thinks of it, and it's like, oh, that's kind of weird, right? But, it's kind of a thing that makes sense for like cocktail hour photos, that kind of thing, right? And so I've been again confluence of work and chance, right? Of doing work, being prepared, putting yourself on it, and then just kind of like just lucky shit happening, right? And so Liberty Magic opened up. I put in the work and I connected with them, and got a job there. And then as I was working there, one of the magicians who performed there, Lee Trabosic, who's a Pittsburgh native, for whatever reason, he referred me to a talent agency that he'd been working with for over a decade. And he honestly didn't have a lot to go on. Like maybe he'd seen me do a little magic. We talked about it, but we just kind of got to know each other a bit. And with no prompting from me, he passed my name over and they reached out to me. And I never would have thought to look for an agent or an agency just because, there's all the negative connotations and stereotypes with them. And I figured, especially this early on, I was just going to see what I could do myself, right? And so I ended up communicating with them. They turned out to be phenomenal. They're called the Talent Network, and they are all the opposites of all the tropes and the stereotypes that I had in my head, right? And so they started booking me more work, corporate and private work, than I could have ever booked myself in that time span, right? Because they already had a business and they had these connections. And so suddenly I was kind of in a position where I could kind of pull back from putting my own energy into booking work.
And you can just focus on the work.
And that's like the dream, right?
That's fucking killer.
So just, if Liberty Magic hadn't opened, and then if I hadn't, and then I had to put in the work to get involved. And then if Lee Terbosic hadn't existed in this theater, and then if he hadn't introduced me to this talent agency, all this kind of chance and work coming together, right? And so I feel incredibly fortunate, and it's just hard to imagine the other side of that coin. Like if these things hadn't happened, like again, just going back to if Liberty Magic hadn't existed, what this path would have looked like, right?
Yeah.
And who knows what other, lucky things might have happened in this alternate universe, or what I might have gotten involved in. But yeah.
With the gigs now, how often are you performing? Is there like an average that you could say, or has it been like very sporadic?
It hasn't been long enough for there to be an average. Yeah.
Fair enough.
I got involved with the Talent Network midway to 3/4 through last year. And then the holiday season is usually the busiest season, right?
Okay,
with like holiday parties and that kind of thing. Yeah. And so
you got looped in right when it's like ramping up.
Yes, which was great. And so worked a bunch through kind of like October, November, December. And then ended the year with the expectation that January, February, March would be very slow, right? And that expectation has been true, which has been kind of fine too in some ways because of some of the opportunities that came up with Liberty Magic. I got to do a show there for their New Year's Eve kind of event in the Cultural District. And then I got to perform that show a few more times through January and February. So it was funny. I had much less work, but I still felt very busy, which was good because I had things to work towards. And then now February 15th was the last show that happened. And then so from then till now, it's been suddenly much more open. And that's actually been perfect timing because like we were talking before we started recording, I've been kind of coming back to a phase of just absorbing a ton of information and then just taking time to think about magic and evolve my thinking and work on new material and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now.
When it comes to the process of coming up with a routine, is that a fair word?
Sure, absolutely. Routine, piece of magic, trick.
Yeah. How much of like I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase this question because I have it in my head. I'm trying to like ask you like whenever you're gonna write a song.
Yeah.
Like is there a starting point for your song? Do you start with the beat of your routine or do you start with the melody? Like, or is it always different? Like, do you have like like I imagine with what you're doing, the physical magic has to work, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to
of course.
Then you have to. So I imagine you need to like come up with a narrative to the magic versus finding a magic to fit the narrative. Or can you do that?
Yeah, you can. Many different approaches. So it's like, I'd say in my own magic learning, generally the advice for, I don't know how to put this either, like more quote unquote serious or the better way to approach it is to not start with the trick, right? Because I think in magician's quest for magic to be more resonant than a puzzle and take it more seriously, the advice stems from a place where it's like, if it's just about the tricks, it's just puzzles and meaningless, and the magician themselves are interchangeable, right?
Yeah.
And so kind of the prevalent advice is to try to start with an idea or concept or an effect that you want to accomplish, and then figure out a method to, like, the method is to use the method, to leave the method for the last thing to figure out, right?
Okay.
And that's often not how it goes, because magicians love methods, right? That's part of what is so interesting about it, right? Is the stuff that goes on beneath the surface. But often magicians love methods and are enamored by them to the detriment of the experience that the audience has.
Yeah,
right.
I could see that.
Yes,
I can relate with that.
And so, especially a lot of the stuff I've been thinking about and reading about lately has been talking about magic, coming at magic from an audience-centric perspective and really trying hard to keep that perspective and to really try to empathize with what is this person actually experiencing with what I'm putting out, right? And will they actually care a shit about it, right? Yeah.
That is 100% where that was my misstep with my last big project. I don't think that I was thinking too selfishly and just caught up in the execution of something without realizing that people are going to watch it, or even allowing myself the time to like view it as an audience member and understand that like, oh, this is dragging on too long, or this isn't, I'm not connecting with the audience.
And it's such a delicate balance too, right? Because you also don't want to be at the whim of the other, right? You're doing something because something sparks something in you and you're passionate about it and you're excited by it and you want to share that, right? And you don't want to lose that either.
There's like a certain ego that people are attracted to, I think, when they're watching a performance. Ego is a word that could be taken with a negative connotation, but I don't mean for it to. There's just like a confidence. Just like, look at me, I'm performing, I know what I'm doing. And I'm not verbally saying that I'm good at this, but in the moment, the way that I'm conducting myself in my presence on the stage, without me having to say it, that I'm good at what I do. So now I have your attention, but I'm also, as a performer, keeping in mind that there needs to be like a vulnerability or a transparency so that, rather than me just yelling a song at them, like I'm performing a song with them, like I'm having a conversation with the audience. And I find that, with like what you do and the way you navigate a lot of your routines, there's usually somebody else involved. So even like if there's one audience participant, like that one person is a representation of the audience as a whole, because they all kind of feel like they are that person. They're experiencing it with them. And it's hard to do that with music.
Right.
You got to connect in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's like the difference between, they've come to a show to see you and they want to get to know you and see what you have to offer. Right.
Yeah.
But done in a way that doesn't treat them like shit, I guess is the way to put it. Right. It's like if you're having a conversation with someone, they don't want you to just tell them nice things about them. Right. They still want you to be you and put out you, but just not be a dick, I guess is the easiest way to put it. So yeah. And I guess that's how you kind of, you do what sparks your joy and interests and share and what you want to share, but you also think about, is sharing this in the way I'm sharing it just self-indulgent and being a dick to them, right? Or is it done in a way that is keeping their experience in mind, right?
Yeah, something that I've found, and maybe you can relate with this, is that just because I have the capability to do something doesn't mean that I should.
That is a very common point of advice in magic. Yeah, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
And oftentimes magicians want to do things just because they can.
Yeah. Or like, just do it a little bit. Sometimes a lot goes a long way. Just like 1 second of something super flashy can stick. But if you're just doing that the whole time, I'm this guy.
Exactly.
It's like, whoa.
Yes.
Please calm down too much. And it's really easy to be this guy as a musician.
Yeah.
It's because there's so much loud and lights and fog and all this stuff. So it's got to scale it back. Sometimes people, because I think like it's that balance where all the extra stuff is fun and it's really important to crafting the whole performance from start to finish, all the nuance. But also people are coming just because they want to see magic, or people are coming to see me because they want to see people playing songs. So don't forget about the songs. Like, don't forget about the magic. Don't get lost in everything else to a point that all of a sudden like the magic or the songs are actually just an accessory to everything else. Like they should still be the main focus.
Right.
Like that still should be the most important thing, but it can be real easy, that I've found just from, again, that past experience where I felt I was putting more time into crafting everything around the songs and making sure that stuff worked, that I forgot about like the actual songs. They got neglected in a way,
Yeah.
And I can imagine that could possibly happen for anybody that's doing any sort of a performance. Have you felt anything like that with the way you've been putting stuff together?
It's that in particular is a question that I've been kind of grappling with over the last few months, which is, on one hand, you want the magic to be meaningful and to communicate something more beyond just the thing itself, right? And so, but oftentimes the way you might see this done is through symbolism or metaphor, right? Where it's like the Jacks are robbers and now they're fleeing from a bank and that kind of thing. But I think there's even almost a greater level of detachment from that, because it's like, I read I'm not going to put this as eloquently, but basically it's like there's something just totally detached from the symbolism and the thing that's happening and then the emotion. So let me backtrack a little,
okay.
Right? Where it's the magic itself is what I've been grappling with is finding this balance of you have the piece of magic itself, and then you have everything kind of that goes into it as well, which is, the presentation or the context or what you're trying to communicate or the emotion, and figuring out what is the balance of those things, right? But I think maybe, again, coming back to a broader way of looking at it, the bigger question is just, okay, what is the experience? Again, like describe the experience you want this person to have, and then maybe the rest will follow, right? And so then I don't know. I mean, it's like, so with the show that you did, right? That the hour show, and you were putting these different elements into it. If you were to do it again, like what is the experience that you want the audience to have?
I think I did end up restructuring it, and it ended up turning into the set that I performed for maybe the past year.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, I kept on tweaking it, and ultimately, we're a band, so I want people to experience live music, but on an elevated level. Like, it's almost, I want to be able to give people, like an arena over the top show, but it's usually in a much smaller space. Just giving people, I just want to present something that's super over the top, super unexpected in an unexpected environment, but that tells people, like, it's a presentation of like me and my music, and just something that follows that particular narrative of, what that album was. The album was called Modern Modesty, and it was just about how people have kind of forgotten what the concept of modesty is in current times because of the internet and social media and everybody being a rock star, and
all that jazz.
The whole idea of just the voices in your head telling you that you're not enough, and at the same time, like, being very judgmental of people and also being judgmental of yourself. And it's like, well, what do you actually like anymore? All we do is judge everything. Like, it's, we're not here to talk about the whole in-depth, but I was trying to, convey all that through like various, like through the songs themselves and narratives that stitched in between stuff. And there was a lot of like funny gimmicks with like, like I like filmed portions of myself that went on the projector that was like the voice in my head, and I would like interact and talk with myself, like it was all timed out and stuff, and like a lot of that stuff. It was really cool and it worked, but I found that it was just too much.
It was too much,
like,
right?
You know what I mean? Like, you have a 4-minute song and then maybe like a 2 or 3 minute interlude in between each song, and it's just too much,
right?
Like, it makes sense, but there are some people that they just want to hear the songs.
Like,
no matter how much,
like, the core of it is still the music.
The core of it has to be the music.
Yeah, at least in that context, in the way it's being framed when people are coming to see this thing, right?
I think people will appreciate the extra thought, but too much is exhausting.
Right.
Because then it becomes a thing where it's like you lose the groove, and then all of a sudden, okay, here's a song again. And then it's just like too many highs and lows. You know what I mean? Like if the whole set is a really well structured roller coaster, you know, you don't want to ride a roller coaster where it makes you climb up this hill, then you go down a fun thing, and then you have to climb up another hill, and then you go down. You know what I mean? Like it's too much. You can maybe get away with that, like, you know, like 2 times, maybe 3 times in a crazy roller coaster. But if you keep doing it, it's too much.
But it's balancing the textures, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's like you're on this roller coaster, you go down this fun thing, and then it stops, and then you watch a 5-minute movie, right? and then you go again.
It just didn't. It was too much. So what I found was, and I think it's just something that came from, you know, me being experienced in writing songs. I feel like I can write a good structured song that's to the point, trim the fat, not too much bullshit. It gets its point across. But I didn't have that experience in terms of like filming and narrating and putting a whole set together. So I'm thinking just like, oh, I need this much time to tell this much of a story, when really I could have done the same exact thing in half the time, if not less. For each thing. So it's just like really learning how to give everything a haircut and really tighten it up. So it's like finding a way to like deliver the point in like the most cohesive, snappy thing, just
like
to keep people's attention, because it's really easy to distract people, or for people to get distracted.
Right. And then again, all those elements overwhelmed what should have been the core of it.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I think that maybe is a good way to think about it, right? Where it's like, as I'm building and writing the show, that the core of it is a magic show, right? That is the context and that is the framing. People are coming to this theater to see the show that in their minds is a magic show, right? And so, but it's keeping that core and then adding things around it to create it's like creating a full experience through where the core of the medium is magic, right? But that's not the only thing happening, right? There's storytelling and weaving different things into it, or what have you, right? And I guess it's kind of, the way I think about it is like the difference in the spectrum of like a musician coming on stage and just playing a song, getting applause, playing another song, getting applause, versus, right?
Well, I think that was an issue that I had. There was honestly, like, it was so tight that there was no time for like really an applause in between songs. And there also wasn't even making that time to say like, hey, how's everybody doing tonight? You know what I mean? Like, it was just coming out, doing the whole thing, and then done. With like, it was almost like never addressing the audience at all, in a way. Like I was neglecting the people in the room, and I wasn't even realizing it at the time until it was too late. And then I was like, oh shit, like that's the problem. I'm not it's like, this is supposed to be a communication between me and the audience, and I'm not even connecting with them at all.
Yeah.
I'm not even giving them the opportunity to feel like they're actually a part of this event. Whoops.
Yeah.
I was just so wrapped up in it.
Yeah.
And I didn't know until, I mean, you do rehearsals and it's not like there's an audience there.
No.
And then afterward, like, what went wrong? And then the light bulb is actually a buddy of mine that had came to the show, was just very straight up and blunt with me about it. Not in a rude way, but it was just like, I think all that stuff was just too much in between the songs. Like, it was just people losing their attention. It was just too much.
Yeah.
And I was like, why? And then I thought about it. I was like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
So it always helps too, having a trustworthy, honest friend in the audience to just tell you, like, guide you along. Because like I'm still figuring it out. You're still figuring it out.
I imagine even more so as a musician, like having difficulties keeping in mind that connection with the audience, because you aren't necessarily directly interacting with them, right? It's already easy enough to forget that as a magician interacting. Yeah. It's like, so often you'll see audience member as prop. Is what
sure
is the lingo. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, man. So with all this being said, I could easily talk to you for much more longer, but I feel that we are an hour and 15 minutes right now,
Mhm.
which is plenty of time, I believe. I think we've told a somewhat a base narrative on who you are. We've discussed some things that I've wanted to talk about.
Mhm.
We're going to have probably plenty of more conversations that should be recorded but won't be at the Pear and the Pickle. So I will say, come to the Pear and Pickle sometime. If you ever want to see Jon, see some of his magic, you'll get some test tricks. You know, it's funny. My favorite thing about like running into you sometimes is that you'll be like, hey, Brian, you got a moment? Or like, hey, Brian, can I ask you something? And I never know if I'm in the middle of a magic trick or if you're genuinely just asking me something. Because it's been both.
Yes. Very
Sometimes
much so.
it's like, you're talking to me for like a minute. And then I realize, like, oh, shit, we're in a routine.
And that's oh man. I mean,
but it's so natural. You're really good at that.
That's a whole other podcast of stuff. I'm like, so that whole, what we were talking about before about that blog I've been reading, it's all about magic in that context of amateur, where, most of the advice given to magic performers is all in the context of the goal of performing professionally paid shows, right? But most of that advice is the exact opposite of what you want to tell someone who's just performing for family, friends, or even strangers in a casual setting. Because, one of the great examples that I read on one of his posts was like, if you're doing, oftentimes the way it goes is if I'm doing a magic trick it's like, okay, guys, now I'm going to show you a magic trick. So I would like you to pick a card, okay? And then blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And then the trick ends, and then the performance will end, right? But it'd be kind of like someone telling, it'd be like comedy in a social situation where it's like, you just have jokes, right? And you have a conversation. It's not like, oh, okay, guys, I'm going to tell you a joke now. And it's kind of like that, right? Yeah. So much more there that we won't necessarily get into right now.
Yeah, it makes sense. There's just a very cool, casual, and relaxed approach to your work that I enjoy a lot.
I appreciate that.
It's been really nice talking with you here. I really encourage everybody out there to, if you don't come to the Pear, you should come to the Pear and Pickle and have a good sandwich and say hi to Bobby. Bobby! The dude. See Jon. But if not there, you can maybe catch Jon at Liberty Magic sometime. You can also see Jon on Instagram at Jon Tai Magic. And you have a website that is TaiMagic.com.
You did your research. And if I can throw one more plug out there, I'm also at Scratch Food and Beverage every Wednesday night, which is another wonderful spot in Troy Hill. So regardless of if you come on a Wednesday night or any other night, it is just a phenomenal spot, and you would have a wonderful time there.
Yes. So please go see Jon. Don't hesitate to talk to him. Very fascinating mind, kind person. I enjoy talking with you, and I enjoyed this.
Hey, me too, man.
So thanks so much for doing it. And that is all, folks. Thanks so much for listening. One more time, Jon Tai. Thanks for being here. Seriously, I really appreciate it. Was this an okay first podcast?
This was rad. Yeah,
cool.
I really enjoyed this.
I'm really glad that we were able to do this. I'll be back again in a couple days with another episode. Same time, same place, same channel. You know the drill. My name is Sykes. Start the beat 2020. Woo, woo. Thanks for listening. And we're done. That's a podcast.